we've had over 100 years of studies of leadership, and virtually nothing new is being said about the core fundamental attributes of what makes for really strong leaders. I mean, there's a little bit of nuance that's being added, but really most of the studies of leadership that are done come up with the same basic answer about what good leaders look like, right? First and most importantly, they have a values anchor. They're anchored in a set of values, a set of beliefs that the people who are their followers find attractive and resonate with, right? And if that values anchor isn't there, it's very hard to be perceived by the people you're leading as being a great leader. And then there's just certain attributes, right, that tend to create credibility in leaders. I won't go through these. Courage, right? You have the willingness to take the tough decisions and not fold, right? Connectivity. There's a story, and it's a true story, about a leader at a large consumer healthcare company who derailed. He was an operating company president. And the story that's told that sort of signifies and symbolizes his failure was a story about him traveling cross-country with a direct report. And the instant that they got settled in their seats on the plane, this operating company president takes out a laptop and starts working and says basically almost nothing to this new direct report that's sitting in the chair next to him, right? And the direct report gets back and gets to the office or plugs in his BlackBerry or whatever happens, and there's a flood of email messages from this guy, right? That's not connected, okay? That's anti-connected, okay? That's anti-connected. Clarity, challenging, commitment, there's a basic set of things there. But the studies we've done on leadership say, and the studies were basically framed as, what do you find inspiring? What kind of leadership do you find inspiring? Was basically the way it was framed. And for some people, it is the heroic model of leadership. They want someone who's charismatic and decisive, and directive and visionary. Think Steve Jobs is an archetype of this kind of person, right? But there's a surprising number of people that find something closer to stewardship inspiring. They remember the people who helped develop them, right? Or who really cared about the organization deeply, and were willing to submerge their egos to some degree to make things happen, including their own personal development for these folks. And so I've built a model around the notion that these are important polarities of leadership that we need. By the way, this links to the fact there's discussions about sort of Jim Collins' model, for example, level 5 leadership. I don't think there's one best model of leadership. I think there really is a situational element to it. There are times when we need heroes. Think turnarounds. There are times when we need stewards. Think sustaining success, think realignment. Most organizations need a combination, right? If you dissect, not dissect, but if you look at any leadership team at the top of a big company, you'll typically find 2 or 3 people that are the core of it. And it's usually the case that one of them plays more of the hero role, and one of them plays more of the stewardship kind of role, right? So you can extend this work into thinking about leadership teams as well. But the STARS model for startup, turnaround, accelerated growth, realignment, and sustaining success. And it basically says, as a leader going into a new role, you want to think hard about where you are, where your organization is on this life cycle curve, right? Are you starting up something, and it need not be a whole business. It could be a project, it could be a process, it could be a facility, could be a chunk of organization. Accelerated growth, taking something that's, we all hope to be there again soon, right? That'll be nice when we're ready. But even now, accelerated growth is going on inside companies. It's just going on inside certain parts, right? It's putting in place the processes, the systems, the hiring to support a rapid acceleration of the growth of the organization. And sustaining success, which I think is the hardest thing of all, right? It's very challenging to sustain success in an organization. And then there's the sort of not so good news side of this equation, right? Shutdown. How many of you have been involved in a shutdown? How many of you want to do it again? It's hard, right? How do you maintain the morale of a group of people as operations are being wound down, or perhaps you're divesting a unit, right? It's very challenging to do that kind of work. And then there's these two that I often focus on, the difference between a turnaround and a realignment. Turnaround is crisis, right? Disaster in progress. all hands on deck, right? Realignment is the proactive change challenge. Storm clouds are gathering on the horizon, right? The wind is beginning to rise, but the storm is not yet fully upon us. What's the difference between leading in those two situations? The biggest difference.
One, you're not putting out fires. The other one, you're constantly putting out fires and no time to really be looking ahead.
Right, so one piece of it, absolutely, Diana, is the pace, right? Things are moving typically much faster. You've got a lot of firefighting going on inside the organization. That's one piece, key piece. What else? Time to finish? Yeah, the actual time period you have to take action is different, right? You have much less time typically in a turnaround. So, say more what you mean by that. Followership. So yes, you're much more likely to lose some good people if you're not careful, if there's a turnaround going on. So you have to pay a whole lot of attention to retaining your best talent in a situation like that. That's absolutely right. How about making the case for change? Yeah. You know, the beauty of the turnaround is the problem teaches the people. Right? No one's going to say we're not in crisis. It's obvious to virtually everybody. And if they don't think they're in crisis, they're dead. Right? Or, you know. Whereas in the proactive change challenge, the essence of the problem is how do I convince people that we need to mobilize to do something? And those are fundamentally different influence and leadership problems. Now, most leaders, you know, at some points in their careers have to deal with all of these, right? And the implication really is how do you think about altering your own approach and your style depending on the kind of situation you find yourself in. And oh, by the way, and again, there's a chapter in the book about this, that you'll often find that a leader of a business actually has all of these going on in parallel in different parts of their organization, right? So this becomes a language for talking about why we're managing this piece differently than this piece, right? I often do work with senior leadership teams around strategy, and one piece of work we do is let's get consensus about what different pieces of the business are in terms of their state. And you'll get remarkable and surprising divergences, right? Where you'll think something's in turnaround, you'll think it's in realignment, you'll think we're sustaining success. And you think to yourself, how can they possibly lead change in this organization if they haven't got a common view of what the situation itself is? Or talking to your boss, right? What am I going into? Is it a realignment, sustaining success? And this is why, again, I'm a big believer in common tools and frameworks and languages for organizations, right? Because then we can talk about that. We can have a conversation about that. Again, from the survey you filled out, I asked you, what do you have the most experience doing so far in your career? And this is the distribution that came up, right? Almost 30% realignment, 25% sustaining success, and so on. So it's a pretty broad distribution. If I had asked you, what would you like to do next? What do you think the predominant responses would be if I asked that question? Actually, I'm going to ask that question slightly differently. If you took a high potential group of leaders in your organization, right, let's say the director or senior director level, and said, if you could pick your next job, what would you pick? What would you guess the biggest responses would be? Startup, turnaround, realignment? How many people say startup? Good. How many people say turnaround? How many people say realignment? How many people say accelerated growth? Sustaining success? Nobody wants to sustain success. There's a paradox here, my friends, okay? When you do this, and I've done it, what you find is the biggest ones are always startup and turnaround. Why might that be? It's the drama. It's not that they're more challenging. They're actually easier. Realignment and sustaining success are really hard, but they're not fun. They're not dramatic. They're not places where you can have a really big personal impact. You can't be a hero in a sustaining success environment, right? So it's just an interesting thing to think about, right? What happens when you create an incentive system where your best people want to be in turnarounds? Think about it, okay? Everyone's hoping someone else is going to screw up a business so they can come racing to the rescue, right? And I've seen it. I've seen it in lots of cultures, right? Cultures of heroism, cultures of firefighting, right? How do you begin to transform some of that is a really interesting question.